Good evening. Welcome to PoliticIt podcast. Tonight we have Representative Ryan Wilcox.
It's always good to be here back in the studio, especially in the new studio. It's a lot of fun. Senator Johnson and I have the opportunity to serve on what's called higher education appropriations together. And because of our different viewpoints and experiences with higher education, we've had a pretty fun conversation about what the priorities should be and maybe what they have been in the past and where we think they need to go in the future. So I think we might start off with that. What do you think?
Yeah, I think that's a great idea.
Okay.
Yeah, so before this thing, we talked about this thing you're passionate about with OTech High, right?
Yes.
So why don't you explain what that is?
Okay, so OTech High is on the campus of the Ogden Weaver Tech College, right? So OTech, hence the OTech. And it is the high school. So we've built a facility. It took us about a decade to get this thing done, right? It started a long time ago in planning and this concept. But the idea was to create a method and a place for kids who really wanted to lean into a technical education, knew that that's what they wanted to do, wanted to have that kind of an advantage with the certificate when they graduated, and would have a place where they could go and focus on that, still complete their regular core curriculum, and then be prepared for the next level, whatever that was, in a more advanced way. This is the first year that that's been there. Now we've got about 120 kids that are enrolled for the first cycle. Beautiful new building, and so far so good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I on that, I like to use the term vocational education because
Yes.
that's broader, right?
Yeah.
In terms of how do we train people for a vocation?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
But why don't you talk a little bit about what you kind of see that being designed as, right?
Yeah. So we still have, kind of the liberal arts approach in the traditional high school and the same curriculum there. But when they're junior, senior, and even, sophomore, if they're prepared for such a thing, we can start incorporating these technical education courses and really the hands-on learning that takes place at that school that are just not accessible in traditional high school.
Right.
You can't replicate in the shop. You can't do that. And you're talking, real life skills, in some cases, jobs coming out of the certificate that make you $90,000 a year out of high school. So whether it's welding, whether it's your, I'm close to some kids that are working on their MA and their CNA at the tech college while they're wrapping up their senior year at the high school. And they'll be able to graduate, in the spring here in a few months with those certifications, so that when they want to go into medicine, so that when they graduate and they head up to Weber State or wherever they're going to go to college now, they're that much further ahead. And frankly, they're making more money than their peers working at the donut shop.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
So I love that part of that.
Well, and a vocational training like that, is this competency-based instruction, which I think has its place.
Which is the core of our conversation.
Which I think really does have its place. But I don't know if you were there the day that some of this stuff got presented, and I threw up a flag and I said, now wait a minute, I hate that we're trying to blur the lines between a technical college or vocational college, right, and a university.
Yeah.
And what I was concerned about was the higher thinking skills, back to a traditional liberal arts foundation, right, where we study the great books, we study the philosophers, we study Western civilization, we study why society evolved the way it did. And it's a broad-based approach rather than a very narrow approach. And I think that produces higher thinking skills.
Yeah.
And when I start thinking about AI, I get a little bit nervous because I say, who's going to be the thought leaders in the next section, right? Where are people learning the foundational documents? Like, for instance, I mean, what did Madison read? What did Jefferson read? Right?
Library. Yeah.
And you think about it, they had 2-year degrees basically.
Yeah.
And they were traditional liberal arts approaches to it. From, like Alexander Hamilton, I mean, he had a little mishap up at Princeton, right? And then ends up going to King's College, which is essentially Columbia University today, right? And that liberal arts tradition that was available then is what's actually held through until just recently, when a lot of this, I would, for lack of a better term, woke curriculum came in and kind of attacked that whole liberal foundation.
Yeah. And so, I mean, I see, when we talk about our technical colleges, I see that as the mastering the skill, right? For whatever that is. There are a handful of my friends who've attended OTech or one of the other schools, and that was their permanent career. Right. They wanted to be an electrician. They knew that. So they went there to learn that skill, became an apprentice, and then became an electrician. Most of them have used that as a stepping stone to something else along the way. Right. And it served them well for that. I got plumber friends that aren't plumbers, but they learn the skill, and they always have that to fall back on. And I have others that's their second career. One that's a police officer, he served and he retired, and his second career, he decided he wanted to be a plumber, so he went back to OTech, and now he's a plumber full time. So we desperately need those jobs. You learn this skill, but that you're right in that we're not teaching you how to think there. And your point about, this other larger effort on liberal arts and higher education, that was my favorite thing when I was an undergrad, right? When I was working on that at Weber State. But it was a course, or maybe two.
Yeah.
Right? It wasn't interwoven into the rest of even the political thought process up there. So and it was frankly invaluable. Stuttering John Stuart Mill and, Montesquieu and just all the different thinkers, Locke, and like it was.
You're hitting those classic authors.
So that was one professor,
right,
that focused on that stuff, and I think I might have had 2 courses from him, like total in the entire time, right? And it just wasn't. It wasn't at all like what you've described. What you want that.
Well, and see, part of my thinking behind this is we really need to return to classic liberal arts education, and it's been perverted.
Yeah.
You think about it, from the left, we had this whole, and I say the woke movement, right?
Yeah.
But this is stuff that came out of the critical theories that started at the Frankfurt School. Marcuse and others basically took the work of Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels, and they basically said, hey, how can we weave that in? Marxism hit a brick wall, okay, during that period of time in the West.
Yeah.
And this critique was a critique of the West, of Western thought, Western civilization, and it basically said this is created to oppress people. Yeah. It's created to put down minorities, right? And this movement got built up. Marcuse and others went to Columbia actually and took over the Teachers College.
Yeah.
A lot of this stuff started sneaking into the education system, and what that did is it basically tore down our whole traditional liberal arts foundation.
Well, you had all these schools that were originally faith-based institutions, right? That now make up the Ivy League, that wholly adopted Nietzsche's proposals on what God is and isn't, and just completely removed any line of or even remembrance of what they were originally founded on. So when we're talking about this entire thing, I think the value in higher education that you're talking about is really it's not in hiding the things that we don't want, it's in really kind of opening eyes to what Marx actually said.
Right. Or
what did he
and what did Adam Smith say? And how did Hegel influence Marx? And you talk about Montesquieu, you talk about John Stuart Mill.
Yeah.
These are the great thinkers that created Western civilization, right?
Yep.
And why did that philosophy survive where the other philosophies kind of died out?
Because it's more than philosophy, and that's
right.
The ultimate thing, right? It's way more than philosophy. These were the foundations of Western civilization, and Western civilization was pretty awesome.
Yeah,
is pretty awesome.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Right, to the extent that we can preserve it, but somehow we've allowed our higher education world, that entire part of our culture, to forget or to intentionally reverse.
Right. And I think that's problematic because and see, I also see this whole competency based thing if we're not careful, that'll push it out in a different way. It'll say, we just want to prepare people for the job market.
Yeah.
Well, there's a richness to a university experience that makes you a better citizen. It teaches you how to think, how to broaden your mind. And I think in this AI revolution that's coming, who are going to be the great thinkers, right? Are we still training those people? And so I'm not negative about this competency-based approach to put people in the workplace, but I am fearful that we allow that to be another thing that wipes out this traditional liberal view to education.
The incorporation, what I love most about the idea is this incorporating it into each of the different elements of what we're teaching. So whether it's, Plato or even Seneca or, some of these others that they came up with pieces of what we hope our people will be, but they only get there by deciding that they want to do that. And that only happens by exposure to brilliant ideas or even ideas that challenge them. For example, in this conversation about competency-based education, for me, it really has to be both. On the skill side, I don't want them to have to spend time in seats, spending more time learning how to, fix the leak.
Yeah.
If it's a plumbing thing, I want them to learn that skill as soon as possible. And as soon as that's mastered, you get the certificate, you get to make more money doing that now. Congratulations. And that's what supports the expansion of your mind and prepares you to be really an educated person.
Yeah. And one of the things that AI is going to do is it possibly, some of the jobs that we have today that we're training people through a skills-based approach, some of those jobs are going to be done by machines.
Yeah.
Right. And so the thing is, though, who's going to set up the framework of the legal system for the new economy, right? I mean, we need people that are trained like Madison was, like Jefferson was. And actually, if you read those books, you can understand why they created this wonderful country that we live in way they did.
Have you ever gone back and, studied Lincoln and the Lincoln-Douglas debates?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. This is some of my favorite stuff, right? Okay. So you go back, and I was always fascinated as a kid how Lincoln, became an attorney. Do you know that story?
No.
He did what they called reading the law, right? Which is essentially just literally reading it, studying with another, as like an apprentice, studying with another attorney. And then once you knew it, it was competency-based, acting as an attorney.
Right.
Right? That's how he became. He go to law school. And when you read through some of that, so you can kind of watch him progress in his legal career, where his thought becomes more advanced, where he gets really good at it. And by the time we're doing Lincoln Douglas, he's got it down.
Yeah.
Right. He's ready for the challenge that he has. And frankly, I think Frederick Douglass was a big part of why he ended up where he did, why he was prepared to be the president at the time. So I'm all in, I think, on both, right? Yeah. On this
I am too. And when I put up the red flag during that one meeting, I mean, it was funny because I started talking about all this stuff, and Kathleen Reby, across the room, she says, you guys better sit down because I agree completely with Senator Johnson. Which was kind of the shocker, right? I mean, I guess it was shock enough that it makes the Salt Lake Tribune, and all of a sudden I'm the great defender of the liberal tradition, right?
Yeah.
But there's reason for that. I mean, we need to make sure we don't, with our approach to universities, we don't throw out the baby with the bathwater.
That's right.
Right.
Yeah.
So
we've got to come out with those people that can still remember how to think.
Hey, let's take a break because I want to get to your stuff too.
All right.
Okay, thank you. Welcome back to PoliticIt. Yeah, Representative Wilcox finally let me take over my show. But hey.
Yes.
It's interesting that I've got a jacket on and what's
yes,
this,
well, it's junior jazz today.
Yeah.
And also if you get out of line, it's good. But
that's pretty cool.
Sorry for everyone if your sound was up too loud with the whistle right by the mic.
So let's talk. One of the things I wanted to make sure we talked about having you here. You chair the law enforcement, right?
Yeah.
And there's a lot of things you guys are working on that I think are terribly important. So let's talk about, if you could kind of explain what's going on.
So there's a lot of stuff. We're on, it's probably the 10th, 11th bill dealing with school security post the Uvalde disaster down in Texas since we started that project. And so there's the school security stuff. There's also, if you look at my bill list, probably most of them have something to do with protecting kids and targeting those who are targeting our children. It's kind of terrible stuff, right? Folks who are traveling here to assault and harm our children is one of those. The first bill that we got through the Senate yesterday actually deals with counterfeit intimate images, like folks using AI. We were talking about AI a little bit earlier.
Right.
To blackmail. I had to add that to the sexual extortion statute. Everything that you see me run, and most of the stuff that comes through law enforcement that comes over to the Senate from us, is from a series of specific cases. There are things that are already happening, things that have happened here. We've had a run of trafficked young ladies from Asia all over the state, but also here in Weber County, who have been forced into prostitution in massage parlors, which has been terrible to deal with and to learn about.
I had a conversation with Representative Gwynn, and he was talking about this. Is that one of his bills?
No, that one's mine too. That's House Bill 38. Senator Musselman is carrying that. He was on our organized crime subcommittee this last year that had that brought to us.
Can you give us a few details about that?
Yeah. What we're really targeting with this is House Bill 38, if anybody's following along, but what we're really targeting with that bill is the criminal organizations that are doing this en masse. So I'll use the example of the young women who have been trafficked that we've identified. They pay someone in Asia to get to America, the dream to come to America, all the things, right? The American dream. They pay someone there that gets them across the ocean to Mexico, because the cartel completely controls the border, right? They then pay the cartel to get them across.
Yes, we said they did. I'm not sure if they still do, but they.
Well, on that side, yeah.
Yeah.
Like there's no question. It is not the Mexican government that controls their side of the border. It's the cartel, and I mean I've been there on that side, looking at them, watching them radio our positions, like the whole thing. As soon as we're gone, they go, right? So you're correct. In the last few weeks, that's very different. We have our own military on the border. One of the amazing things about that, and I'll move on from there, is that the cartel's special forces, which seem to be primarily made up of former Mexican special forces, right, are just as well armed as our guys. It is literally, it is the potential, full-on war zone across there. But these girls that have been trafficked primarily through San Diego, for some reason, I don't know why that particular point, but that's where we traced it back to, primarily through San Diego and then throughout the Western United States, right? So they're moved around. They pop up really quickly in what looks like a kind of a normal, massage parlor. And most of the time, by the time they get here to Utah, they are $40,000 to $50,000 in debt now to criminal organizations who control their every movement, their life. It's entirely separate from the whole consenting adult thing, like we have with our neighbors in Nevada, with the prostitution scenario there. That's one thing. But when we're talking about people who are either one, underage, who are children legally, or two, are here and are participating in this against their will, that's entirely different. And then we're talking sexual slavery.
Well, and this is in Weber County.
Oh, yeah. No, we had over 300 when we identified them, John. Over 300 of these things throughout the state of Utah. We had, when we ran the numbers and looked at what we actually had in Salt Lake County. Salt Lake is not the it's the 29th largest media market. We're 17th in the country per capita in Salt Lake County for these operations. It's not a small amount. We are punching above our weight in the exact wrong things, right, when it comes to this. And so we've had a number of raids, particularly in Weber County, that we've been pretty aggressive with. North Ogden, Pleasant View, Roy, and Chief Gwynn, Representative Gwynn, Chief Gwynn. We had 4 like 2 weeks ago that we took down in Roy, 2 of which we had already taken down like 8 months before. So somebody else comes in, they just swap out the names, get a new business license, and away we go. So we're attacking that 2 ways. My bill, so House Bill 38, will attack it from the criminal side. How do we target these organizations? How do we make the painful enough? The goal is to make it painful enough. They don't want to come back. They don't want to do business here. Like, if you're going to do it, I guess you stick to Nevada, but you go somewhere else where we're not going to be the safe haven for trafficking young girls into prostitution. You have, of course, the business side as well. So I also serve on business and labor, and we're giving cities tools that they haven't had in the past to be able to shut them down on the regulatory side. And if there's a violation, when there's a violation, to make sure that it's painful enough financially. If you're participating, if you're facilitating, if you knowingly allow this to happen, that you can't sustain that business anymore. But they're making so much money on these things, both with the fentanyl issue, which we're also addressing with that, and some other bills. These criminal organizations.
What's the fentanyl thing?
Yeah, and so Representative Gwynn is taking the lead on that one, on that particular aspect of it. So it's a separate bill. But we're recognizing fentanyl for what it is, which is 10,000 times more potent than the drugs that we're used to. 2 milligrams of fentanyl will kill a man my size, to give you an idea. And we're finding it in 16 pounds of powder, pure fentanyl. They're not even just sending the pills across anymore. Now we're just making it here and using the pill presses here and mixing in with other things into liquid form. The cartels are selling it, they're distributing it as other drugs. So people think that they're buying cocaine, they think that they're buying heroin, they think that they're buying something else that an addict might be used to, and all it really is fentanyl. Because it's so much more potent, right? It does that much more damage. And so for an addict that might have the right tolerance for whatever it is, you have to remember too, cartel isn't super close on quality control. They're not super focused on that. So you don't actually know how much of what you have in there. But we're also finding we don't have to train the dogs anymore, our drug dogs, to find a lot of the other drugs. We just have to train them to find fentanyl, because they're lacing pot with fentanyl. They're lacing cocaine. They're incorporating it into all of these other drugs. And at the end of the day, the estimates, you are far more likely, if you're homeless in Utah, to lose your life to drug overdose from fentanyl than you are anything else. Certainly not exposure, certainly not hunger, certainly not any other drug. It's not even close anymore. So what the bill does is it recognizes that this is a unique threat. If you're caught distributing fentanyl, if you're caught participating in that, then not only are we going to go after the organization as much as we can, but those penalties are now going to bump up to second and first degree felonies.
Wow.
Yeah.
So what are some of the other things? I mean, let's get to the school safety.
Sure. Yeah.
So why don't you explain what's going on there now and what we really need to do to make that a reality? So
this year's bill is really just a follow-up to what the work that we've done over the last 3 years. So the things that we've learned. So Appalachia High School in Georgia, right? This last fall, I've been out there now 3 times down to that state and to have those conversations. And as we've talked to the superintendent, we've talked to the people involved in the case, we learned a handful of really important things from that one. One is that the alert system, Alyssa's Law, which is, I'm pointing like this, but it's like the badge that teachers wear around their neck that can immediately communicate with law enforcement, with 911. That came into play immediately in that case. They had installed it the week before the disaster happened. And that resulted in getting the officers there within 30 seconds.
Wow.
Yeah. So the SRO that happened to be the one that intervened in that case, again, because we had
what?
School resource officer.
Okay.
So because we had a police officer that got the alert and was able to get there immediately, this was also one of the first ones where we ended up we ended it with the police officer, which has also been the most controversial part of what we've done, right? People are worried about having police officers in schools or armed security or whoever, they choose for that person to be. But we were able to end it with 4 losses of life instead of 30, which that could have easily been based on what that kid had and what he was using. It was also the first one where he didn't have to shoot him. The kid gave up when he saw the SRO and he was confronted. That's unique. That is not normal. So we're studying that to understand what was the difference there, and how can we replicate that scenario again. But even since then, we've had 2 more. We had Antioch, Tennessee here during the session, and we had another one just before that, in Michigan and Wisconsin. So there's, we're not ready.
So what are our major roadblocks right now?
Really what we're most focused on with this one, yes, it's the implementation of the bill itself as it already is, but the important thing I think for everybody else out there to know, we finally got the assessments in. And so every school in last year's bill was required to complete an assessment of the facility itself, so that we would know for the first time what you need. What do you have? Do your doors lock? Do they lock from the inside for a classroom so that they could be secured if they needed to? Do you have a secure entrance? Do you have cameras on your entrances, right? Do you have the protection, the window protection if somebody were to do what they did in Covenant and what they did in Parkland, and all these other places where they shot through the glass to kill kids and to gain entry. And so we finally have that, and we got it. We presented it just a few days ago this week. And what that means is that we discovered that we don't I don't want to give the percentage here,
right?
But most of our schools don't even have the proper first aid kits and bleed kits. We only know that because we got the assessments done, because law enforcement stood up and took care of it and partnered with our schools to actually do it. We know how many locks we need now, and there are a lot, right? We know where those holes are, and so now that we do, we can appropriately use those resources to fill the gap on those most critical things. So we're going to be able to go down that list and do it. We also understand, and this has always been the case, that we knew that we were starting from way behind the 8 ball, so to speak. But because these assessments have been done, we also now know what ongoing costs are going to be the most important. And so things like AEDs, automated external defibrillators when there's a heart issue, having the bleed kits in place, but not only having them there, having staff know how to use them. The training is the most important part of that. So any law enforcement officer will tell you in the emergency, you fall back on your training. You fall back on your training in that, because otherwise you freeze. We do all sorts of things as humans, right? And any of us would. If something were to happen here right now, I would fall back on what I know, but only because I've been through a lot of those trainings with them.
Right.
Otherwise, I don't know what I do. And we're in that situation that the training, because it's required on a regular basis in order to be effective, that's the most expensive part long term. And for the first time, we're having the appropriate conversation about long-term funding. And that's really what we need right now, is to make sure this isn't a one-time thing. Yes, we could fix that entrance right now to this room. We could fix, we could make sure the AEDs are there, or that the bleed kits are there in a worst-case scenario, or that the locks are working properly, that they even lock. That's another thing that was kind of sobering to discover, that there were so many that we didn't even have the ability to lock, for example. But that we know how to use all of those things, and that we're properly trained. It's back to that, if you are prepared, you shall not fear. As long as we go through the preparation, we're going to be all right. Even in the worst case scenario.
Yeah. Well, I think it's probably one of the most important things that we're doing in the legislature right now. So,
yeah.
Safety of our kids is pretty important.
It just has to be an ongoing part of what we do now. And that's okay. It doesn't need to be scary. A lot of people scared about different aspects that they may or may not understand, or this will be more expensive. Yes, it will. We had to add the radio repeaters so when the cops come, they can actually communicate and save your kids.
So is a lot of that in place? I mean,
most of it's not. That's why we added it.
Well, yeah. What's been most successful so far?
Yeah. The beginning of that cultural change and understanding. So it's gone from just fighting me outright, we're not going to do any of these things, to having that data and understanding that, when helps, like I mentioned the radio repeaters, so that to understand that for some reason, 30, 40 years ago, there was an exemption put in Utah law that we didn't have to have those in schools. We had to have them here. We had to have them at the building across the street. We had to have them at the mall. But for whatever reason, I guess because they thought it was expensive, we gave an exemption to education. That was a huge mistake. So I had like 4 or 5 different whistleblowers from different districts and from different agencies come to me that first year and say, by the way, I don't know if you know this, but the radios don't work in most of the schools. I'm sorry, what? Right? Like, what did you say? And I've had that response a number of times when people bring this stuff to me. And it's like, wait, they don't? Like, why wouldn't you mean the firefighters can't communicate with the police in the emergency? Yeah, that's what we're saying. Okay, well, let's talk about that and how do we fix that, right? Or when I asked the question initially, about first aid kits, even here in Ogden, where we happen to be right now. So we funded those from the school foundation, right? To make sure that they were in every classroom because we found out they weren't either. So we're also, and this is an important part, we're also setting up the ability for a statewide foundation focused on school security that can move faster than the government. So that when we identify some of these things,
that you can actually get them.
It can actually work, like it does with the Ogden School Foundation, frankly.
Yeah.
Right, with the local district foundations. That we can identify something that's on that list. So we have what we found in that.
Kind of helps that you're on that foundation.
It helps that I'm on the foundation. Yes. There's, for example, we had 500 million on that list. My initial estimate, I thought it would be closer to 800 million. I think some of those numbers are a little off, but the reality is, best case scenario, I come away with this session with 100. Right? That's what I was able to get last year for the grant program to help them to accelerate that. That still leaves 400 left, John.
Right. Yeah.
Right. And that's where we could work with the private sector. I could go to some donors in Utah that genuinely care about kids and say, we can accelerate this. We can make sure that every single school has the bleed kit they need right now. Right. Or if the locks or the window film or whichever part that they want to help with, that gives us a mechanism so where that can happen. And they can get state purchasing, basically bulk buying when we're buying for 1,300 schools at once, right? We can do that. We have a number of issues. Charters are very different. We had a massive fire next to Da Vinci here in Ogden couple of weeks ago.
We just
talked. That's right.
Yeah, we just had the firefighter.
Talked about it. Well, the conversation I was having while you were having the conversation with them, the conversation I was having on behind the scenes, both on the investigation and then on this side, is that was about $850,000 damage to Da Vinci.
Oh my gosh.
And additional damage, like to the IRS building, whose roof will probably have to be replaced, and to the, we don't know estimates yet on the police station and the fire station that are right there, the headquarters next to it yet. But that school, which is already kind of compromised, right? It's very difficult from a security standpoint, doing the very best that they can to do that. We hope that insurance takes care of it like they should. And if you've ever dealt with an insurance company, that can take years.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, we've got kids that need to be protected and that don't need to think about what they, these kind of things when they go to school. All I need them worried about is their classical education, right? Yeah. I need them studying their math and their English and their music. That's an arts-focused school, so I kind of love those guys anyway. And that's what I want them worried about it when they go to school, nothing else.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wonderful. Hey, we're out of time.
Yeah.
So thanks for coming in.
Yeah.
Nice having
Senator.
these conversations. You got any closing remarks?
No, just know there's a lot of people that are working on these things. So from the state security chief through his entire team, through the folks at the state school board, who are completely bought into helping your kids to be as safe as they can be when we're in these places. As we teach these skills, as we focus on being prepared for these things, really, there really doesn't need to be this kind of fear of going to school that we've seen. Or, every time we have one of these threats that come out in Weber County, for example, we talk about the cybersecurity threats or any of these things. As we prepare for what that is, we can understand that, yes, life carries risks, and that's going to be a part of it. And I know what to do if something happens. And we have plenty of people in and outside of your school who are working and are willing to stand in the way of that intruder or that threat, who love your kids and who have signed up to help make sure that they're safe and they don't have to worry about it.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Ryan Wilcox.
Yeah.
We'll see you guys next week.
Okay.